How many of you ever said, that was the longest minute in my life? Right? Maybe it was a conversation you were having with somebody that just couldn't get over fast enough, or some other kind of facetious type of thing. Or maybe it was some harrowing experience that you had, right, that you don't even want to think about again because it was, in fact, something that felt like the longest few seconds or the longest minute of your life. Isn't it interesting that we find ourselves from time to time having these experiences where time just seems to kind of drag on, and that it goes on far longer than it actually is? Or even sometimes we have seasons of our lives, right? Moments that become days, that become weeks, that become months, where it just seems like, man, this is such a long and difficult stretch of life that I feel like I'm going to be walking through. But sometimes, some of us in the room, we also have the experience of having walked through a time like that, and now looking back, since that season is over and a new season has emerged, where we look back and we remember how long that felt, how long that night just seemed to kind of wane on. But now, looking back, we have a different perspective, that it wasn't as long as it seemed. Today I want to talk about our lives. I want to talk about the plans that we make for our lives, how we think about the future, and what part does God play in all of that thinking. So James chapter 4, I'm going to invite you to stand with me. We're going to read verses 13 to 17 together. If you don't have your Bible with you, the verses will be up on the screen. You can follow along. James chapter 4, verse 13. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will travel to such and such a city and spend a year there and do business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring, what your life will be. For you are like a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you should say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So it is sin to know the good and yet not do it. Thank you. You may be seated. So James now, he speaks, I believe, especially to people who are pursuing a life of following Jesus, and criticizes the kind of idea where a person or two or a group of people would say to themselves, hey, today or tomorrow we will travel to such and such a city and we'll spend a year there and do business and make a profit. In other words, he's criticizing people who are making plans of a certain type, a certain sort. Now, I want to say at the outset here, it is not foolish to make plans. Where are my big planners at? Raise your hands. Big planners, right? You just kind of plan everything out, right? You know exactly how things are going. I used to, my aunt and uncle, my aunt especially, she used to talk about me, how intentional I was about how I just sort of thought about the moments ahead and the days ahead and the years ahead. And she used to say, you have every day charted out, mapped out for the rest of your life. And I'll tell you what, boy, if she could just see me now. Because I am nothing like that. You ask my wife, and far more spontaneous than a planner. But so this isn't against all you planners, okay? I want to set your heart at ease. It isn't foolish to make plans, but it is foolish, what James is telling us here, to presume the future. That's where foolishness gets introduced. It is in the presumptions that we bring into the plans that we make with regard to the future. In this particular scenario that he's painted for us, the presumptions are, number one, hey, here's what we're going to do, right? The verbs that are used here are in the future tense. We are going to go. We are going to spend. We are going to do. And what are those? Those are presumptions. They're presumptions on the days ahead and the future ahead. And secondly, they presume on what the outcome will be, right? We're going to make a profit. Now, some of you have ventured out into the world of being your own boss, of establishing a business, of doing something kind of for yourself. And that enterprise required a tremendous degree of planning and execution. And it was done with the intent that it was going to create a good situation for you, right? Like nobody goes into business with the hope, I just hope I lose a lot of money. You know what I hope? I hope I end up with a team of people I really don't like to work with. I just hope that everything falls apart. No, I mean, like we go forward with our plans with the hope that something really, really good is going to come out of it. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with the plans that are being made or the thoughts for what could be, the potential of what might happen. The problem is, as James points out here, that there are presumptions being made on the future. And the reality is that in order for them to go into this city and to spend and to do this and to do that and to ultimately experience the outcome of having made a profit, so much has to go right. And what James says is, listen, you're talking about what you're going to do over the course of the next year, and the reality is you don't even know what tomorrow brings. Isn't that funny? Like many of us, we have kind of thought about, mapped out, right, done our 1-year plan, our 3-year plan, our 5, our 10-year plan, but we don't actually know what tomorrow will bring, do we? Tomorrow is my last day in the country. I'm going somewhere where I need a passport. So I have all kinds of thoughts about what tomorrow is going to look like. But how many of you know that your last day before vacation does not go exactly as you planned, right? So I'm getting myself emotionally and mentally prepared for all of the things that are going to go wrong tomorrow. But at some point, I'm getting on an airplane on Tuesday, and off I go. We don't even know what tomorrow will bring. James says, we don't even know what our lives will look like. Anybody ever had an accident? Isn't it incredible how much an accident disrupts your plans? Right? All the things that were supposed to happen in the days ahead, and fortunately, I think we're past the season, but all of a sudden you slip on a patch of black ice and boom, you're in the hospital, bones broken. And those plans have changed, right? Isn't it incredible how even something like an accident can drastically alter the course of where we thought we were going? Now, if you're here this morning and you're not a Christian, you can see, I think, you can identify with the problem of the kind of presumptive thinking that we bring into the future and how everything can go wrong. You think about the people that James is talking about here. Like for them, back in James's day, to do something like travel to another city was far more dangerous than it is for us to travel today. They had to take into consideration all of the other kinds of things that would be potential problems in what plans they were making. I mean, they lacked the kind of technology that we have where for them to take risks might have been far riskier than it looks like for us to take risks. So much of what they did or how they profited depended on things like weather conditions, depended on the stability or the instability of governments that they might encounter. Sickness and injury looked very different to ancient people than it does for us today. They didn't have things like banking or easy ways to transmit money like we do, right? And so all of these things play into the difficulty of making advanced plans for the future, and yet here they are in all of their pride and arrogance, as James described it, saying, hey, today or tomorrow, we're going to go and we're going to do this and that, and this is how it's going to look, this is how it's going to all come out. And he says, you don't even know what tomorrow brings. And here's the reality. There's really little difference in our experience today. Like, we still cannot make presumptions on the future. We run risks, things like losing a job. Think about how disruptive to your plans, to your future, losing your job. That's a major kink in the works, isn't it? You think about how something like this unforeseen financial stress that you find yourself walking through. Like maybe everything was kind of going just fine, but then all of a sudden a series of unfortunate events takes place, and boom, you find yourself in a place where I don't even know how I'm going to take care of all of these responsibilities. Think about how our current lifestyle as modern Western people is totally encumbered by debt. Now, this message isn't about debt, but debt is a really great illustration when we're talking about how we presume the future, because debt makes a tremendous presumption on the future, doesn't it? It presumes that what you feel like you can afford and take care of and be responsible for today, that those conditions are going to remain at least constant or perhaps even get better so that you can continue to meet those obligations in the future. That's what debt is all about, isn't it? Students who are making the transition from high school to college often will take on sometimes gobs and gobs and gobs of student debt with the idea that, hey, the investment that I make in my education is going to ultimately land me in the kind of a job where I'm going to be able to pay off the loans that I've taken for that education in the first place. Credit cards are these magic plastic tools that we use to buy things that we don't have any money to pay for, right? And it makes a presumption. It says, hey, I want to enjoy this thing right now, even though I may not have the money for it. I'll just pay for it slowly over the course of time, but at least I get to enjoy it now. But again, that just presumes on the future. It says, well, I can afford the monthly payment, but again, we don't know what tomorrow holds. We don't know what is going to change. When we find ourselves, signing for a car loan or a second car loan, again, like we're taking on responsibilities that presume on the future. Obviously, the big one is like when we want to buy a house, right? And it's not like the old days where maybe you got a piece of property or were able to secure a piece of property for a decent price, and then the neighbors came around and helped put the walls up to your building, right? And all of a sudden, in short order, you had a house, and it wasn't something that you had to pay for. Those of you who have walked through the process of buying a house and getting a mortgage, the stack of papers is this thick, isn't it? It's not even 8.5 by 11, it's 8.5 by 14, right? Legal size, and this thick. And it's so funny because reality, I think that whole pile of paper could be probably reduced to just one sheet of paper with one simple line that says, hey, bank, I'm going to owe you money for the rest of my life. And then you just sign it. Instead of being a mortgage application, it should probably be called something like a slave application. Right? Because the Bible tells us that the borrower is a slave to the lender. Right? That we put ourselves in a situation, every time we presume on the future, we put ourselves in a position where we are now working for someone or something else. Now, if you are a Christian, if you are following Jesus, not only do you have to take into consideration the reality that we don't know what tomorrow holds, we don't know how things are going to change, it is wrong for any person to make drastic presumptions on the future. You, as a Christian, have a whole other layer, a huge layer to take into consideration as well. And that is, with regard to the plans that you're making, this big question has to be asked, and that is, what does God think about all of this? What does God want for me? Like, I know what I want for me. I know where my heart is leading me. And I was told if I follow my heart, I could never go wrong. What a great song that is, huh? Some of you know that's not true. Right? But I know where my heart is leading me. I know what I want to do. I know what I want. But what does God think about this? And what does he want from me? Where is God leading me? I have to ask myself this question. Is Jesus in the plans that I'm making? Again, in verse 14, James reminds us, he says, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring or what your life will be, for you are like a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes. And here James speaks to the very nature of who we are as humans. A couple different things that I want to point out with regard to our limitations as humans. First of all, as humans, we are finite, aren't we? We are not infinite. We are not infinite. We are finite. You know, we take a breath every 3 to 5 seconds under normal circumstances. And what James does as an illustration is he basically says that our whole life is something like one of those breaths. Now, we can take short breaths, medium breaths, and long breaths. You take a long, deep breath, that breath might be something like 10 to 20 times bigger than a short breath. And if we were to say that those different kinds of breaths represent the different kinds of lifespans that are experienced by we humans, you know, whether a short breath corresponds to a life that met its end far too soon, or medium breath was too soon, but still having lived a decent amount of time. And then that long breath, that represents a life that has been lived to the full and maybe even beyond what anybody could assume they might experience. While that deep breath might be 10 to 20 times longer than the shallow breath, compared to one another, there's a big difference, but compared to the whole of our lives, they're really very much the same, aren't they? And our lives are like that. Whether we live to be 20, whether we live to be 50, whether we live to be 90. Those of you who are 20 years old, if you don't believe me, look around, find yourself a 70, an 80, 90-year-old person, and ask them. And they will tell you how fast life goes by. Again, it feels like when we're in the middle of it that this is just going to go on forever, especially the younger you are, the longer you feel like you have. We need to be reminded of how finite we actually are. Not only are we finite, but as humans, we are contingent. I wonder who in the room can take credit for bringing themselves into the world? Anybody? What does that mean? Well, it means we are contingent beings. Our very existence depends not on ourselves, but on something or someone else, doesn't it? So who can take credit for the circumstances of their birth? Nobody. Or who should take the blame for the circumstances of their birth? Nobody, right? Those are not things that we have any kind of control over whatsoever. And neither do we have so much say as we think when it comes to how we are sustained in this life. Our lives, the very fact that I continue to go on breathing depends on so much more than just my self-determination to keep on living and to keep on breathing, doesn't it? So much else comes into play. So much, especially that is outside of my control or outside of my power. And so we are finite. We are contingent. And so James says in verse 14, he counters this idea of presuming on the future and says, here's how you ought to think about the days ahead, the years ahead. Instead, he says, you should say, if the Lord wills, we will live. If the Lord wills, we will do this or that. This is the right perspective. Proverbs 19, verse 21 says, many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. How many of you have ever made plans that just fell apart? Anybody? How many of you have made plans that are currently falling apart? And there's a prayer card in the basket right now. It happens all the time, doesn't it, right? There are all kinds of things that we feel like ought to be or that we want to make permanent fixtures in our lives. We say, this is the thing, or these are the things that I'm going after. But it is incredible just how transient so much of what happens in our lives actually is. But the purposes of the Lord will stand. They remain firmly and permanently established. And so what we should take from that and from what James is telling us this morning is that when it comes to the Lord's will, God's will should be more like advance guidance with regard to our plans and not a postscript to the plans that we've already made. You ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. And let me just address some of you experienced and well-seasoned Christians who have read, who have heard this verse 1,000 times, perhaps even memorized it, and who have learned how to add to all of your prayers the simple words, if the Lord wills. Right? Sometimes we have adopted we've adopted the words into our language without an actual commitment to what those words really, really mean. That is, we have already made the plans, we have established the plans, we have set our heart toward some particular objective, and then we just kind of throw on there because we want to maintain our religious piety, if the Lord wills. But what the Lord wills is not intended to be a postscript to the plans I have already made, but rather the counsel that I should be seeking at the very moment it is time to even start imagining what plans I should be making. What imagination I am even bringing into my future. But as it is, James says, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. And so now he criticizes them for boasting in how they are reigning in their own lives, as their own lords, as their own kings, as the ones who are calling the shots. And he says, the kind of boasting that is done with a presumption on the future. Hey, I'm going to go and I'm going to do this and that, and here's how it's all going to turn out. He says, all such boasting is evil. See, they were bragging about how they could go about making their plans without God's help. And let's be honest, like, the majority of what we in this room collectively have done with our lives has more often than not been done according to our own counsel and our own desire, hasn't it? In fact, if we were honest, we would probably admit that it continues to be a struggle for us even today. I can't get up here and tell you that I have this constant and nagging kind of attachment to, what the Lord is doing, where the Lord is directing, how the Lord is moving. Like, I so easily and so quickly get lost in my own, here's what I'm doing, here's where I'm going, here's how it's all going to go down. Right? That's a hard thing, isn't it? That is a hard struggle to maintain the kind of posture in our lives that invites and reinvites God into the making of our plans. But it is exactly the way that we are supposed to look to the future. Because, and again, many of us have experienced this. We have experienced making plans that go against the plan that God has for us. And we have found ourselves frustrated. We have found ourselves feeling empty. We have found ourselves feeling like we're just spinning our wheels and we can't get any momentum in the direction that we're going. And the reason sometimes is because that wasn't God's plan. It was my plan. It was human engineered, and it was human empowered. And what we need instead is we need the kind of thoughtful, looking forward, where God is doing the engineering and where God is doing the empowering. In Isaiah 30, verse 1, there is a very descriptive reality for the covenant people of God. who, rather than, they were in this covenant with God, and what was established in that covenant was that God was going to be their God. He was going to be their protector. He was going to be their provider. He was going to be the one that they looked to. But from time to time, they murmured within and among themselves that that God was not good enough, and they began looking for help elsewhere. And Isaiah 31 says, "Woe to the rebellious children." This is the Lord's declaration. They carry out a plan. As a nation, as a people, they carried out a plan, but it was not my plan, God says. They made an alliance, but they did it against my will, piling sin on top of sin. They were guilty of the sin of going against God's plan in favor of their own. And so our big question this week is, what good is a plan the Lord isn't in? What good is it for me to be thinking through and planning for and walking toward a future as a follower of Jesus that the Lord isn't in? Following my ambitions, following my pursuits, following my heart's desires, if the Lord's not in. Verse 17, James closes this out by saying, "So it is sin to know the good and yet not do it." This is a very famous verse. So often it's used to just remind us as people that we certainly can appreciate that doing wrong is wrong, but that not doing right is also wrong. That there are ways that we can be negligent when we know that there is good that needs to be done or that we are called to do and not doing it, that is sin in the same way that actively committing a sin is a sin. And what I think James wants us to know is that we can't use the excuse that we haven't actively made plans to do what is wrong, right? Like I'm not making plans to take advantage of somebody else. I'm not making plans to manipulate another person to doing what I want them to do. I'm not making plans to perpetrate evil against another person or other people. Well, that's all fine and great, James says. But what we also have to take into consideration is the reality that we are called, when we know to do what is good, to do it. Now again, this is used oftentimes just in a very, very general and vague sense, but let's keep it in context and not lose the priority of what James means when he says this, and that is as it pertains to the making of our plans and the future that we see for ourselves. Right? In the example that he's giving here, the picture is of these merchants who are making plans to make money. And the problem is that they are motivated to gather their wealth more than they are to do good with the wealth that they have earned. It was the servant in the story that Jesus told who was given something to work with, to invest, to deal with in a way that would bring honor to the one that it belonged to. And it was the servant who did nothing with the money that he was given that was declared to be wicked. In Matthew 25, we find the Lord himself disassociating from those who neglected plain acts of charity and generosity toward those in need. And so we understand there is a high calling to seek out what it is that the Lord wants us to do and to do it. And that there's no excuse that we can make that just says, well, so long as I'm not doing evil, so long as I am minding my own business and tending to my own affairs, I suppose I'm free to do with what I have whatever I want. And again, I would challenge that notion with, what good are the plans that we make if the Lord is not in it? So let me just share with you a couple things as we close out our time. We might ask the question, well, how can I firmly establish the Lord's plan over my own, right? This is hopefully the intent of many of us in the room this morning. It's like, okay, I want to know what God's plan is. I want to follow his will. I want to bring my will and my desires and my ambitions into alignment with what he wants for me. The first thing I would encourage you to do, that we have to do, is we have to open the door for him to work. We have to open the door. God is not of the type who is just going to barge through, knock the door down, and do some kind of hostile takeover of our will, regardless of what we want. It is my responsibility to open the door and to leave room for him to work. Revelation 3:20 says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come and eat with him and he with me." Jesus longs to have union and communion with us, for us to be constantly and unceasingly attached to him, where we find the very source of life and nourishment, where we find the guidance and the direction, the leading that we need to walk through the experiences of this present moment and then whatever comes tomorrow. But I have to open the door. You have to open the door. Secondly, we have to make time, enough time for him to speak. And what a challenge this is for us. How many of you are running in 1,000 different directions? Right? It's just the nature of the world we live in. How many of you find yourselves just constantly distracted by things? Right? Like just, there's so much noise, there's so much clutter. And what we have to do is we have to actually make enough time and the right kind of time for God to speak into our lives. If I want to know what God wants for me, I have to give him enough time to do it. That's the only way. There's no shortcut. There's no other way to get there. I have to make time that is quiet, where I have relieved myself of the distractions. I've put my phone away. I've gotten myself away from the noise. I've gotten myself away from all the things that are pulling at me. And you say, boy, that's a really scary place. Just me alone with my own thoughts? I know. Same with me. That is a scary place indeed. And yes, you may find as you try to employ a discipline like this in your life that your mind just starts wandering off in 1,000 different directions. That's perfectly fine. When you find yourself wandering off, just try to bring yourself back, listening for the voice of Jesus. He will speak to you. He will lead you. He will guide you. But we have to be intentional about it. And so let me just challenge you with this question, because I think at the end of the day, at the very heart of it, the idea of following Jesus wherever he wants to lead us sounds like a wonderful and beautiful thing. But I really wonder, and I wonder this for myself, and I think this is a problem that I experience, and I wonder it for you. I imagine it's a problem that you may experience as well. But the question is, do we neglect seeking the Lord's will? Like truly seeking the Lord's will for fear of what he might say? Is this the reason why we don't open the door? Because we're afraid of what might happen if Jesus actually comes in. Is this why we don't give him the time? Because we're afraid of what he might actually say. If any of you not asked somebody else a question because you didn't want to hear the answer, like you kind of knew what the answer was going to be, if that person was honest, you didn't want to hear it, and so you just didn't ask it. I just wonder, again, I'll just speak to myself for a moment. Do I neglect really seeking the deep things of what God's heart is for me and for my life because I'm afraid of what he might say? I'm afraid of where he might tell me to go. I'm afraid of what he might tell me to do. I'm afraid of what he might tell me to give up. I'm afraid of what he might ask me to hand over. I'm afraid of how he might call me to surrender. Arthur Simon said, "The problem is not that we've tried faith and found it wanting. That is, the problem isn't that, like, okay, I've tried this thing of living a life of faith, and it just didn't really hit for me." He says the real problem is that what we've tried mammon, right? Mammon is kind of that all-encompassing word that we can use to describe things like the love of money and of material things. And here's the reality. We've tried that. We have tasted that, and we have found it addictive. And as a result, we find following Christ inconvenient. Right? Because Jesus said, he said it himself. He said, no one can serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and mammon. You can't. We're allotted one master each. That's as much as we can follow. And because of the addiction and the lure of so much in this world that pulls us in these directions that are away from God, but that we find incredibly attractive and incredibly alluring, incredibly hard to let go of. Really following Jesus in the way that he has called us to follow him is inconvenient. It's inconvenient because of what I might have to let go of, what I might have to give up, what I might have to say no to, how I might have to say no to myself. This quote is very closely related to a more famous quote by G.K. Chesterton, who said, "The problem with Christianity is not that it has been tried and found wanting, but that it has been found difficult and untried." In other words, true Christianity is not the problem. When people truly try to live out the ethic and the calling of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, in the radical sense of what that all means, the pursuit of that, you're not going to lack for anything in terms of all that God will bring into your life. That's not the problem. The problem is more that we look at what Christ has actually called us to do, what Christ has called us to be, and we said, I don't think I can do that. I don't know that I'm ready to try that. This is a hard one to just kind of wrap up and bring the plane home to land. I just want to leave you with that. I want to leave you to sort of wrestle. Like, what does it look like for you? What does it look like for me? As I think about where I'm going, as I'm thinking about the future, am I inviting Jesus into the making of my plans, into the establishing of my ways? Or am I just flying solo?